In October 1944, Hungary's regent, Admiral Miklos Horthy, attempted to follow the Romanian example and lead his country out of the war, switching sides if necessary. His attempt failed spectacularly, as his already suspicious German allies were closely watching his moves, but also because most of his own generals abandoned him, something he could not fathom. In this video, I detail this attempt and why it was doomed to fail. Horthy was in a precarious situation. He had reluctantly approved Hungary's entry to the war back in 1941, after which Rapid Corps participated in Operation Barbarossa. Due to strong German pressure, Second Army followed in 1942, but Stalingrad and Second Army's defeat at the Don convinced him that Germany could not win the war. Along with prominent members of the government, such as General Vilmos Nagy, Minister of Defense, he hoped that peace could be made with the Western Allies, excluding the Soviet Union, and that British or US troops would arrive first to occupy Hungary. They had already made a secret deal with the Allies in 1943, according to which Western air forces could fly over Hungary unharmed to reach German territories and not bomb Hungary in the process. However, 1944 brought more complications. German forces occupied Hungary in March, after which the Allied bombing campaign against Hungarian cities commenced. Horthy could remain in power, but First Army was mobilized and sent to the Eastern Front. The mass deportation of Jews also began, while newly appointed, strongly pro-German members of the government and high-ranking officers plotted against Horthy himself, who could not believe that a Hungarian general would choose the Germans over him. As the Red Army approached the country's borders, it became obvious that Stalin would have to be included in any peace talks, which the Western Allies also pointed out. Therefore, even though the hastily mobilized Second and Third Armies were sent into southern Transylvania in early September, after Romania's decision to switch sides, Horthy was already thinking about armistice. Pro-German Prime Minister Stoyai was replaced with General Lakatos, who was firmly loyal to Horthy. The deportation of Jews in Budapest was prevented, and General Gábor Faragó was sent to Moscow to negotiate peace. Agreement was reached on the 11th of October, although Prime Minister Lakatos officially informed the Germans about the talks and protested that, according to some sources, a possible coup d'etat was in the works with German support. The Germans were indeed working on a plan, which they named Panzerfaust. Heinz Guderian sent his own deputy, General Walter Wenck, to Hungary, who delegated political tasks to Edmund Weisenmayer, military matters to General von Greifenberg, and SS and Gestapo tasks to SS Obergruppenführer Winkelmann. Together with Hungarian officers, such as General Berekfi, they concluded that the Buda Castle, by which they meant Horthy and his circle, could not be trusted, but that they would receive early warnings in case armistice was signed, and that the Royal Hungarian Army would continue fighting as long as violence and open clashes were prevented. The Arrow Cross Party could then take over, Horthy would be removed, to be replaced with Ferenc Szálasi, leader of the Hungarian Nazis. This way, Hungary would stay in the Axis, and the war would continue. Regent Horthy counted on the military, but out of 3 field armies, only the commanders of First and Second Armies, Generals Miklos and Veres, could be trusted, because the head of Third Army, General Heslényi, was pro-German. Then again, it was the emissary of General Veres who leaked the plan. These 2 armies would open up the front and possibly join the Soviets in a march on Budapest to relieve the capital. While the government was discussing minor details, commander of First Corps in Budapest, General Bakai, another staunch loyalist, was kidnapped by the Gestapo, but Horthy decided to stay and not travel to the front to place himself under the protection of First Army. This army, still in the Carpathian Mountains, was in the best position to switch sides, but even though its commander, General Miklos, was still loyal to him, he felt isolated and did not even trust his own chief of staff, General Kary, who also happened to be loyal to Horthy. This made it impossible to coordinate plans. The preliminary agreement with the Soviets was signed on the 11th of October, but when Horthy made his famous radio broadcast 4 days later, on the 15th of October, he only mentioned that negotiations were underway. This confused his remaining followers, who did not know what to do. Chief of the General Staff, General Vörös, tried to send out the necessary orders, but in the case of First Army, his own subordinates blocked them, while the commander of Second Army, General Veres, was closely watched by the Germans. Horthy's own surviving son was also kidnapped by the Gestapo, and the new commander of First Corps in Budapest was arrested by his own underlings, along with the commander of the river forces. A few hours later, General Vörös himself was removed from his position, the original orders regarding the cessation of hostilities were rescinded, and new orders went out that called for the continuation of the war. Horthy, who first met with Hitler's special envoy, promised that Hungarian units would not turn on their former allies, but this was of course not enough for the Germans, who now wanted complete submission. By 4 p.m., German troops secured the strategic points of Budapest. Szálasi officially formed his new Nazi government, which Horthy soon accepted, fearing for the life of his only remaining son. At the front, Generals Miklos and Kary, still confused by the lack of clear orders, decided to go over to the Soviets the next day, but without their troops, so First Army was soon in the hands of pro-German officers who issued new orders. Second Army, which was retreating from Transylvania, soon lost its commander, as General Veres was arrested by the Germans, while Third Army continued fighting as if nothing had happened. A few smaller Hungarian units went over to the other side, but most stayed and reluctantly decided to continue the hopeless fighting. Those formations that could have resisted the German occupiers stood down, mainly due to the lack of orders, but also because many officers, knowing full well that their new opponents had more and better weapons, tried to avoid a massacre. In the end, Horthy's hesitation and his reluctance to fight the Germans were the deciding factors. He believed that German units would simply leave the country, just like they had done in Finland. But Hungary was in a very different geostrategic situation. However, we should also mention that out of 106 generals, who had celebrated the regent's birthday the year before, fewer than 10 remained loyal to him. This was a tragedy, as vast portions of the front were still held by Hungarian divisions, and without these, the Wehrmacht had no hope of continuing the war in Central Europe. Then again, a collapse of the front would have meant Soviet occupation in many more European regions, and we know how that turned out. The Red Army's behavior in Hungary, tens of thousands of women were raped in Budapest alone, turned even neutral bystanders against them. Unlike in Romania, where the population felt robbed after the Second Vienna Award, most Hungarians were sympathetic to Germany. The Nazis were still preferred to the communists, except among Hungarian Jews, who had enjoyed relative freedom before the German occupation. For many, including most officers, turning on the Germans would have been a betrayal of their entire career, although more and more saw that the war was lost and that further bloodshed was entirely senseless. The troops would not act on their own, without clear orders that never arrived. In the following months, most Hungarian units would slowly melt away, as more and more deserted, further weakening the remaining units. I will talk about this period in the next episode. Thank you for watching.